Good afternoon and welcome to Forum for a Better Understanding. It's a pleasure to be with you again with a very interesting topic that we have never covered before. It's called pastoring, and we're going to be having a special guest join us through a video clip, Eugene Peterson. He will be sharing with us his own insights into this wonderful ministry that he has shared, and our three guests today are very conversant with him, his work, and his writings. To my left is Norman Broadbent, who is the minister at the First Congregational Church of Fresno and has been on this program many times. It's great to have Norman back. Across from me is Garner Odell, who is an interim pastor and also an adjunct professor at the San Francisco Theological Seminary. And right across from me is the Reverend Dr. Chris Neufeld-Erdman, who not only is an OSB CAM Oblate, but also is the pastor in our local church, the University Presbyterian Church. We're so glad that the three Reverend Doctors, who are really conversant with ministry at a very serious, deep personal level, will share with us some insights today. Norman, could you begin by why this topic of pastoring is so important to you?
Well, I think that for many of us in the practice of parish ministry, we do look towards those who are what we might call pastors, the pastors. And I know I have several people that I look to, Joan Chichester, Barbara Brown Taylor, and Leith Anderson, as well as now Eugene Peterson. People whose experiences in ministry oftentimes offer them perspectives that parallel some of my own thoughts when I'm alone by myself late at night, and have come off of that strenuous council meeting or have come away from a really difficult pastoral setting. And more importantly, voices such as these also speak to the great joys that are to be found in our work, which far outnumber those times of trial and tribulation, at least from my experience. And so, when you approached us about this topic, I was more than happy to lend whatever insight I might be able to the work that Eugene Peterson is offering our communities.
Thank you, Norman. Garner.
Well, it's good to be here. After 50 years in the ministry, I have been put out to pasture. And so I'm pastoring rather than pastoring. But looking back at it, much like Eugene Peterson does in his book, I'd like to start all over again.
Wow. What a beautiful thought at the tail end of a career to wish I could do this all over again. Thank you very much. What a beautiful opening. Chris.
One of the reasons I'm interested is because I have such a serious concern about the state of the church, particularly in America today. And I think it's largely due to the formation of our pastors and the loss of the pastoral art.
Wow.
So for me, I come back to Peterson, a fellow Presbyterian, who puts my feet back on the ground. He's clear about the crisis, and he's also, I love what he's clear about the joy, and I need that because it is rigorous, it's difficult. The challenges knock me off my feet, puts me back on my feet again. And I thought, hang out with these two guys who are just a couple years older than I am. This line from Garner is just, it helps me. He wants to start all over again. And when I'm thinking about quitting, I hear that kind of word and I think, it's a good gig. It's necessary. So that's why.
It's a gift. Thank you so much, all of you. Yeah. We could begin now, or continue now, with the first chance we give to Eugene Peterson. Let's run that clip, Craig.
We have a profile now of the writer and retired Presbyterian minister Eugene Peterson. His latest book is The Pastor, a memoir filled with Peterson's concerns about how hard it is for pastors and everyone else to live Christian lives in modern America. Peterson is best known for one of his earlier books, The Message, his translation of the entire Bible into everyday American English. The Message has sold more than 15 million copies worldwide. Peterson lives now in northwestern Montana near Glacier National Park. In late winter, it's both majestic and full of life. Peterson grew up nearby in Kalispell in the Flathead Valley. His father was a butcher who built a summer place on Flathead Lake, which Peterson and his wife Jan expanded and improved. When we met there, I asked Peterson about his theology, but he said he has little time for anything abstract. He listens for the holy, he said, in people and in the quiet of the place he loves.
How do you pay attention to the unheard, the unseen? In a cluttered, noisy, distracted society, it's very hard to do it. A lot of the language in the church, well, not just the church, in religion itself, has to do with trying to figure out the truth of things. What's true? What's true? You know, I'm not really interested in what's true. I want to know if I can live it. I want to test it out.
Peterson was the founding pastor and for 30 years the minister of Christ Our King Presbyterian Church near Baltimore, Maryland. Because he'd been trained as a scholar, he started out giving lectures from the pulpit.
After a couple of years, I realized, this isn't working. And I began to change the way I talked, the way I preached, the way I taught. So I was inviting conversation. And you enter into the soul, the spirit of somebody else by listening to them, not by telling them something. I get asked, what do you miss most about being a pastor? I think it's the intimacy, the incredible gift of intimacy. You go through death with somebody, with their families, and there's an intimacy that comes through that is just incomparable.
I wonder if any of you would like to begin with one thing that you could definitely find resonating with you in your own ministry through the words of Eugene.
I'd like to zero in on what he said about listening to the holy. And when I hear that in my life, it's listening to the pushing and shoving of the Holy Spirit. Because I've tried numerous times to run away from that because it hasn't taken me, or I haven't seen it taking me into the parish. And much of my ministry has not been in the parish. It's been on cruise ships, it's been in civil rights movements, it's been in prisons, it's been all over. But I find that in each of those, there's an excitement about establishing a congregation, and as Chris said, feeling some joy coming out of that. And so I really respond to that, and that's one of the things I'd like to look back and take some more of those chances.
Let's see a second clip where he goes in another direction, talking about a problem he sees in churches that are just too big to do the ministry that he knows he's called to do. Let's hear Dr. Peterson.
In his 30-some books, one of Peterson's themes is that there's no way pastors can develop one-on-one relationships with their people if their churches have more than about 500 members.
A pastor in personal relationship is not just trying to find ways to make people feel good, loved, whatever. This is a kingdom life we're living. It has to do with salvation. It has to do with justice. It has to do with compassion. And you can't do that wholesale. You just can't.
So Peterson deplores megachurches. He thinks they're too big for pastors and worshipers to have close relationships with each other.
What's so bad about it is that they don't have to live responsibly. When you're part of a megachurch, you have no responsibility to anybody else.
But, obviously, aren't megachurches what many people want?
The minute the church and pastors start saying, what do people want, and then giving it to them, we betray our calling. We're called to have people follow Jesus. We're called to have people learn how to forgive their enemies. We're called to show people that there's a way of life which has meaning beyond their salary or beyond how good they look.
Chris, what segment there, what word, what comment did you want to jump in on?
Well, he's pretty grumpy. about megachurch. And I think he has a right to be so. I think I appreciate the fact that he's older, he's looked at these things, and he's grumpy and concerned. Now, these churches are authentically trying to translate the gospel into contemporary idiom and forms, and I value that. However, I was trained as a business marketer. I was the vice president of marketing for a software company before I became a pastor. And so I have deep suspicions about the ways in which the church plays games at the market without really thinking missiologically. That is, how do we truly become missionary in a culture? And I think there are vast problems with the megachurch culture. Not only the things he mentioned, but I think in terms of the formation of a pastor. What I see in my leadership training and the work I've done teaching at the seminary and other places. Well, I once proposed a course called The Virtuous Leader. I was told it wouldn't sell. They want skills for leadership.
Skill sets.
The tragedy for me, and I do spiritual direction for pastors of monster churches. I know their inner lives. They're not different from most of us. However, I do find them collapsing. Collapsing because of the vastness of taking care of an institution, maintaining the market, keeping up the income, keeping the program running, and inside their lives are caving in. There is no virtue. So I'm afraid with the largeness, the vastness of these churches and the programs, the common practice of virtue, the depth of life, the looking for the holy and the sacred, that gets lost in managing the circus.
And to tie in with what you're saying, I've also had the opportunity to work in the large church, the medium-sized church, and the small church. So I've had some taste of each of those pies, as it were. And one of the things that I think that I really resonated with me was when he talked about the role of intimacy.
Yeah.
That where I find among my colleagues of the larger churches getting into trouble is that they have become so much of a CEO managing the pieces that they have not been able to retain an intimacy, not just with their congregation, with their own spouses, their own partners, their own family members, just simply because the call of the institution is so overwhelming that the intimacy of being able to take that time and to sit and to listen is really important. One very quick lesson that I learned upon my graduation from seminary all these 35 years ago was with Brown Barr, who was then resigning from the church that I was his seminary intern with, he was going to take on the deanship at San Francisco Theological Seminary. And he called me into his office and he'd said that in preparation of going out into that role with the seminary, he had gone out from his large church into all these smaller churches in around Northern California. And he said it was a revelation to him, and he wanted to bequeath to me the message, always follow the upward call, not upward mobility.
Wow.
That in our training, in our generations of training, we were trained going to the small church, and you sort of work your way up the ladder until you're pastor of this multi-staff church. And his position was kind of like what you had articulated at the beginning, Garner. If he could do it over again, he found so much vitality in the intimacy of relationship in those smaller congregations. And that's always been a very important guide in my ministry through the years.
We have to take our break at this point, so please stay tuned, because in 1 minute we'll be back with some more Eugene Peterson and comments from our guests. Stay tuned.
KNXT thanks all its loyal viewers and respected businesses who have supported your Catholic television station. Now you can support KNXT with program underwriting by having your name, your company's name, or organization associated with your favorite program. Detailed information about you or your company will appear before and after each program or day part you select. Keep the quality and spiritual message alive and make a difference. Call 559-488-7440 today or go online at knxt.tv to find out more about program underwriting on KNXT.
Welcome back to the second part of our conversation with these pastors about the gift and the challenge of pastoring a church at this time in history. Now, one thing that Eugene Peterson is going to share with us now is something we've all heard of, the prosperity gospel. Let's see where he lines up with that thought and where our panel also has their sharings on it. Let's
Not
begin with
surprisingly, Peterson also condemns the so-called prosperity gospel. preaching that says if people follow Jesus, God will give them tangible rewards.
Well, I think it's a lie. I think it's just a downright rotten lie. It's nowhere in Christian tradition. So how does this get going in our culture? It's greed is what it is. It's greed given a spiritual name. God will bless you. I want to ask these prosperity people, do your people ever die? Do the people in your church ever die? What do you do when they die? Where's the prosperity in that? I don't have much patience with them, to tell you the truth, because I think they're defrauding people.
I also asked Peterson what he thought of doing church online.
Oh my. You know that you can have virtual baptisms now? There are pastors who have virtual baptisms. He'll baptize your baby in the bathtub. You do the baptizing, he'll say the words, and you have a virtual baptism. How do you like that?
Yeah, how do you like anything that he just said? Who would like to begin with any of these meaty topics?
Well, it seems to me that what he's talking about, the prosperity gospel in the church, is much like what we see in our own culture. You buy this from this company and you will be rewarded. You buy this from that company and you will profit from it. And it seems to me the church is simply, or some churches have bought into that possibility. And people are just as gullible in the church as they are out in the culture. What do you think?
Well, one of the problems that I see, and one of the issues that troubles me, is the very real correlation between the message of the prosperity gospel and the culture of the personality of the one delivering that message. It seems to me that oftentimes those personalities stand far and above the pastoral work of the congregation itself, and therefore. For me, I really worry about the authenticity of the charge to go deeply into oneself, to live with a mystery. When you're talking prosperity, you're talking about things that are tangible, achievable, acquirable, and quantifiable in my corner. And the work of the Spirit in the mystery of faith is a completely different process. Is that?
That's right. That doesn't sell. I mean,
it doesn't sell.
You can imagine people listening to this TV program, and for them, mystery. I don't want mystery. But this is the core of our tradition. Everything else is golden calf Christianity. You know, come down from the mountain. Let's have a golden calf party. You know, what I'm deeply concerned about is the ego of the leader. The gospel is about dethroning the ego, and I'm afraid what happens here is the ego of the leader gets stroked, creates a community of primitive Christianity. I mean, primitive souls. I mean, really at a very greedy level, in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's way down here, you know? And it's not about the healing, the wholeness of the ego and the human self. As Peterson says, it's about salvation. The salvation not just to get to heaven, but the whole of our lives here and now. And for me, it starts with the leader and the pastor. And so many of them, us, are not schooled in holiness, true holiness, where the ego is rendered, incapacitated in order to find its true self.
But this prosperity gospel, doesn't it tie in with this megachurch concept? Because lots of times we see these churches grow and grow and grow and grow and get bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's the same thing when you're talking about putting a little money in and you're going to get more back and you're going to grow and it's going to grow. And it's almost like a Ponzi scheme, a religious Ponzi scheme.
From my contact over the years with a number of those mega church campuses, and having had a chance to have dialogue with not the head pastor, but those who serve under the head pastor, the thing that I am constantly reminded of in their stories is the tremendous turnover that is continually taking place in those congregations. In part, the large church does provide a setting in which people can come in and to remain anonymous. And frankly, that's what a lot of people want to do, because the anonymity is sort of a buffer against having to do the deeper soul work that the faith requires. And as a result, you find a tremendous turnover. I've been talking again with some of these colleagues of mine. They describe how after a period of time you find other offshoot, smaller churches starting up out of that large church, simply because of just this almost necessary need to move towards greater intimacy and relationship in spirituality. So.
You know, our fourth clip almost puts this all together when he does his basic critique of the toxicity of American culture and how it is so foreign to the gospel. So let's play that clip and have final comments from our panel.
As Peterson compares life on Flathead Lake in Montana to life in the rest of the country, he does not like what he sees.
American culture is probably the least Christian culture that we've ever had, because it is so materialistic and it's so full of lies. The whole advertising world is just intertwined with lies, appealing to the worst of the instincts we have. The problem is people have been treated as consumers for so long they don't know any other way to live.
The antidote for Peterson is what pastors can teach.
Introduce them to a living Christ, a Christ who makes life livable in the terms in which you're living. That everything in the gospel is livable, not just true.
Although the mainline Protestant churches have lost millions of members, Peterson sees them as essential.
But I think the mainline churches are the ones who are kind of holding things together while all this fatty stuff goes on.
I could not resist asking Peterson how he and his wife, as Christians, have dealt with the prosperity his books have brought them.
We give it all away. Our standard of living hasn't changed. Not a bit. We know a lot of people I like to give it to.
In retirement, Peterson seems content with his writing and his sense of place, of being, in his words, at home.
What makes me sure of what I'm doing is that virtually everything that seems to me that I've believed, I've been able to live.
Much as Peterson likes stories and language, he made it clear that for him as a pastor, what matters most is not the words he preaches, but the way he lives.
This was just refreshing to just see someone be so straightforward. In conclusion, I think you all have a chance to maybe have a final thought, your own, reflecting on Dr. Peterson. Where would you like to go? Norman.
I guess the first thought I have is that I don't want to necessarily dismiss all of the ministry and the work that the larger churches in the culture are doing, because there is some very vital and effective ministry that they're doing that others of us haven't picked up on. But I think that the other piece that I really appreciate from his comments and his work and his thoughtfulness is just a reflection on the necessity of my own work of instead of being a leader whose ego and personality has to be out ahead of the rest of my crowd, is how do I integrate myself in the work that I do so that we become a demonstration plot, as opposed to a consumer agency for people.
Garner.
Well, I'm kind of frustrated because I have the feeling that it's very difficult, or it has been very difficult for me to have the kind of one-on-one personal spiritual relationship with people in my congregations. When it happens, and it has happened periodically, it's almost a miracle. But I have found that most people in the congregations really are uncomfortable with that. They're uncomfortable with the personal. They're uncomfortable with this, almost the spiritual. And when I've had the experience of coming into a group of people and somebody says, well, what do you do for a living? And I say, well, I'm a minister. And the conversation changes and people drift away, and it's been very frustrating. But I've also found that with my colleagues too.
Chris, you have also not only taught, you have a wonderful parish here in town, but then you're also a Third Order Camaldolese Oblate. Does that figure into anything that Peterson has been talking about that deep personal spirituality that a minister needs?
I think so. And that's why I'm an oblate, because I need an alternative community that keeps my feet on the ground. In the writings of the Desert Fathers is the story about if you ever see a monk trying to climb his way into heaven, grab him by the heels and pull him back to earth. And I need that to keep pulling me back to earth. I'm not nearly as generous. I would love to be as generous as you are, Norman, to the megachurch, but I think it's serious problems, and I think that I can value their work as I would any other social organization or political party that may be doing some good, but it's not Christian. It's not the gospel. I think we need, in Thomas Merton's vision at the tail end of his little book, Wisdom of the Desert, he's got an essay. In the tail end, he says, we need a new monasticism. And that's what Peterson's doing. He's standing at the edge of a lake in Flathead Lake, and he's looking out, and that's exactly what in the 3rd and 4th centuries those monks did as they fled Rome and Alexandria and Antioch, and they headed out into the desert to cultivate a spiritual life and communities that could sustain people through the rigors of the collapse of the Roman Empire. And that's precisely what they did. So I think that's where we are. And Alistair MacIntyre, the famed social theorist, what did he write? After Virtue, which was a treatise of political philosophy, he said, we are waiting not for a Godot, but for a new Saint Benedict. And he ends his treatise on moral virtue with that line. And I think that's what we need, and I think that's what he's calling for.
We'll be back next week, believe it or not, with the very same panel to discuss the importance of the Scriptures and important translations of them. Please join us again. God bless.